See, there we go. We've got a speaker working. Hello, how's everybody doing? Okay, first day at reInvent. I can tell everybody's getting in the swing. Well, welcome. As we're kicking off day one, I hope that you're all ready for a great week ahead of you and that you're enjoying some of the content. I hope you enjoy the discussion we have lined up for you today. My name's Max Peterson. I'm the Vice President of Sovereign Cloud at AWS, where I lead our efforts to help ensure that customers around the world have access to the most advanced set of sovereignty controls, privacy safeguards, security features, all available in the cloud. Before stepping into this role, I led our worldwide public sector business, where I had the distinct honor to help customers achieve their missions through government or education, national healthcare systems, aerospace and satellite, and not-for-profits. Particularly all sensitive customers who were trying to meet the evolving security, compliance, and sovereignty requirements that are springing up all around the world. So I feel like I'm particularly well suited to take on this role, and I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have today. I'm sure everybody read the brief, and you know that we're actually going to have a really exciting, inspiring, innovative leader join us up here today and talk about how they drove these new requirements that resulted in the dedicated local zone offering that we've announced. But right now, I want to share a couple of broader insights about how AWS is helping companies and governments and others manage the constantly evolving sovereignty landscape so that you can advance your cloud journey. I know that many of you are facing complexity and changing dynamics, in particular as policies and regulatory schemes continue to evolve. And this is happening at a breakneck pace. And so with that comes this concern, if you're serving constituents or customers or businesses all around the world, how do I keep my capabilities innovating and evolving quickly and still meet all of these different regulatory schemes? How do I make sure in particular that I've also got all of the right knowledge and skills I need, that I am engaging and delivering at an affordable cost, and that in fact I have a plan to be able to actually manage this evolution with the tech staff I've got to be able to stay compliant. Our first customer to deploy the dedicated local zones, the Singapore government, we're going to dive deep in the session today about how they approached it from the very beginning. It was very classically a joint customer working backwards engagement. And we worked with them on addressing the distinct data classification requirements they had, the distinct security requirements they had that included physical security requirements, in order to help them continue to move government workloads to the cloud. Before kicking off the discussion, though, I want to go through a number of different tools that customers are using from AWS to help manage their requirements around the world. So, what is digital sovereignty? I bet you if I went around the room, I would have a slightly different answer from different people here, because digital sovereignty requirements are evolving, and they mean something depending upon the local or regional context that you're operating in. In fact, adding to this complexity is the fact that there is no common definition. Nobody owns the definition of digital sovereignty. It's different across different workloads, different data classifications, different industries, different sectors. And so that's the place where AWS is aiming to help our customers address that complexity with a set of standard offerings. And let me start first off by just talking about what we see as the key themes from customers. So these are distilled from our customer conversations, our partner conversations, when they say, well, I need to be able to meet the digital sovereignty goals of X. It's really come down to these four different areas. And the first one is data residency. It means that they really need to know where their data is, have control of where it's stored and transferred and auditable at all times. So that's a key pillar in most digital sovereignty schemes. The second one is operator access restrictions, so that you can be sure that neither AWS nor a foreign government can access your data in the cloud. Importantly, you also need to be sure that bad actors can't access your data in the cloud. The third one is resiliency and survivability, so that you can sustain operations even despite emergency situations or foreign disruptions. And the fourth one is independence and transparency, in terms of what's the governance, the ownership, and the operational requirements. In particular here, we find it useful to include local technology vendors who integrate and deliver some of these solutions for customers because of their intimate knowledge with those local or regional definitions driving digital sovereignty today. This one's a great question, I think. Why does this matter? Well, here's why a number of people around the world are concerned. Digital sovereignty has popped up over the last couple of years as one of the largest areas for concern. In fact, an IDC survey conducted just this year, February, 82% of respondents said that they were implementing sovereign cloud solutions, considering or looking at this issue over the next 2 years. So clearly, this is a signal that we've got a vast majority of customers directly or the customers of businesses on AWS that need to start thinking about what their comprehensive plan is to address digital sovereignty. At AWS, giving customers control, and in that dimension, giving customers sovereign capability has been a focus since day one. We were the first cloud service provider that gave customers the direct ability to control where their data was stored and the ability to only move their data. And in fact, we disclosed this with the first data transfer transparency website launched years ago. So you could see when you were building a service, which services inherently transferred data, like DNS services, and which services like S3 were under your control to where the data would be and where it could be used. So customers have told us, as we talk to them about digital sovereignty, that they're deeply concerned that they could have costs that spiral out of control, or they could have a much more complex security environment if there's not some way to rationalize that. And so last year at re:Invent, we announced the AWS Digital Sovereignty Pledge. And we said, we're going to continue to work on enhancing features and capabilities in the public cloud to be able to give customers the broadest set of offerings right in the public cloud. We didn't want customers to have to choose from a limited feature sovereign cloud. We wanted them to be able to continue that innovation and that delivery on top of the common AWS infrastructure that they understood, common services, APIs, common controls, common privacy safeguards, all while letting AWS take on more of the complexity to manage to these digital sovereignty schemes. So we've already talked about how it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. That's why we've pledged to continue working with customers, partners, and regulators to innovate and develop solutions on the commercial cloud. We've been engaged for decades with regulators all around the world, with delegation, with DPAs, with security regulators. So our experience in this area is very deep, and this is one of the things that helps us deliver solutions on a global scale for customers. So since launching the Digital Sovereignty Pledge last year, this gives you a quick snapshot of the ongoing innovations that we have delivered to make the AWS cloud itself sovereign by design. And then we're going to talk about some of the new features that we're doing. But as you can see, we didn't make a pledge and then wait for things to happen. We got right out of the gate with several important new capabilities. And we did this across the global infrastructure, which today has 32 global cloud computing regions that are made up of clusters of data centers, 102 availability zones. These are all fully isolated so that you can get the sort of availability, reliability, and redundancy that you need when you're delivering mission-critical applications. We've also announced plans to deliver 5 more AWS regions with a total of 15 more availability zones. And all of this allows customers to control where their data is located, how it's stored, where it's used, and where it's transferred, and who has access, hitting that second block of customer requirements around digital sovereignty. Beyond infrastructure, we've also built our services so that they are regionalized wherever possible so that they don't have a lot of global dependencies. This helps customers increase their resiliency. It gives them autonomy to run wherever they want to run around the world, depending upon the constituency or the customers that they're trying to serve. Importantly, this is underpinned by the AWS Nitro system. And we started developing Nitro over 10 years ago to be able to ensure that customers could have a ironclad architecture to design for access, availability, control, and integrity of customer data. And importantly, the Nitro system we just had validated, as you saw in the prior timeline, in May of this year by an independent third party called the NCC Group, so that they can attest to the fact that the AWS Nitro implementation, in fact, provides no access to any AWS personnel at all. And this is part of the AWS's unique AWS silicon. We also provide tools to help customers automate and monitor their data storage and locations, including AWS Control Tower, which provides data residency guardrails that help customers ensure that customer data is not stored or processed outside of a specific AWS region or regions. And today we announced 65 new controls that customers can choose from so that they can prevent actions, enforce configuration, and detect undesirable changes across an entire organizational boundary. And this is important because you know how easy it is to build and create in AWS. And so Control Tower gives an enterprise now a predictable way to enforce that kind of data residency on all of the accounts inside of your organization. It also gives you a consolidated view of the state and compliance of all of your controls. And so a key function is auditability, to be able to not just achieve it technically, but be able to have an auditable trail and demonstrate that you have maintained that positive control. We'll keep on expanding these types of services in the AWS commercial cloud around the world to deliver on our Sovereign by Design pledge. We also know that customers like to use partners around the world. So partners are an integral part of all of these different offerings. They provide that local, often certified or distinctly cleared personnel component that helps customers achieve their digital sovereignty goals. And then we just announced in October, so last month, we just announced a new offering called the European Sovereign Cloud. This is a new and independent cloud region that will be operated within the European Union, that will have the same security and availability and performance of our commercial regions. However, it'll have a number of distinct controls that are driven by EU regulations. And there's many, many organizations across the EU that shared in this sort of development with us and understanding the requirements. And they were very excited to welcome the announcement of a European sovereign cloud so that they'll be able to, again, take advantage of scalable benefits instead of having to use a feature-limited sovereign cloud offering or instead of having to build their own bespoke infrastructure. We will continue working with regulators and cybersecurity organizations throughout Europe and around the world to help make sure that we're applying the necessary controls and compliance standards to the European Sovereign Cloud. And for example, one of the organizations we worked with very early on in the commercial cloud with the C5 attestation was the German Federal Office of Information Security, or the BSI. Who last month, when we announced the European Sovereign Cloud Initiative, came out with very strong support as an approach to meet their high data security and their distinct, highly regulated industry requirements. And to help customers comply with those regulatory requirements in a different way, we launched the AWS Dedicated Local Zones in August of this year. This is a type of AWS infrastructure service that's fully managed by AWS, but it's built for the exclusive use by a customer or a community, and it's placed in a customer-specified location or inside existing customer data centers so they can run sensitive and other highly regulated workloads. You're going to hear a lot about that from our expert panelist that's going to join me here in just a moment. We didn't build this alone. Again, we did exactly what Amazon is good at, which is working backward from customer requirements and working directly with the customer to address their very specific needs. And you're going to get a benefit from that distinct, specialized experience and that collaboration here today. And so without further ado, I'm excited to bring up our guest and our panelist, Cheow Hoe Chan, who's going to dive into this in a dedicated fireside chat with me. Cheow Hoe, thank you. Welcome.
Very much, Max. Thank you.
He currently serves as a government chief digital technology officer, Singapore, where he's been leading their efforts over a long time to drive pioneering change and innovative public sector services that benefit the country's citizens and businesses. He's got more than 2 decades of experience overseeing organization-wide IT development and systems, and he's got a track record of leading organizations and teams through transformational change, because only a part of this is technology, to be able to meet their mission needs. And so thank you, Cheow Hoe. And I think, let's see, I need a clicker. Did you notice that seamless transition to the fireside chat? So that's great. All right. Hey, thanks, Cheow Hoe. Thanks for joining us today. Let's go ahead and just dive right in. Can you start by telling everybody a little bit about the Singapore government's Smart Nation?
Yeah, about 10 years ago, actually, our Prime Minister at that time, in 2014, announced that Singapore needs to become a smart nation. I mean, it's a small country, but technology plays a pivotal role in terms of how the country is going to develop going forward. Okay. And I think the whole idea behind Smart Nation is very simple. It's about how do you improve the life of citizens, how do you make business function better in an environment that is highly automated, but also very importantly is to be able to create communities, digital communities where people can interact better, where no one gets left behind. So that was really the concept of Smart Nation. But one important thing is that for that to happen, we realized that we need to democratize technology and get government out of the legacy systems. And cloud was really the first very important thing that we did, actually.
So how did you get started, and how long ago did you get started?
We started about 8 years ago. One of the things, I came from the private sector, and we took a very practical approach, which is you start by moving out workloads that are not sensitive, unclassified, like school websites, websites that are basically just informational, basically. These are public information anyway. So we just moved directly into the commercial cloud. No restrictions, nothing, right? But that was quite a lot. It was probably like about 30% of our workloads were on all these things, right? It became very clear immediately that cost goes down, resiliency goes up significantly because now you got global resiliency basically. And what's even more importantly is that serviceability, et cetera, just goes up. And people were happy with that. Citizens, businesses were very happy with that.
Yeah, and I know that you undertook sort of a systematic approach to that. What efforts did you take on in order to ensure compliance requirements were being met? And as we just talked about, they're springing up and they don't just stay still, right? And so how did you take a look at the challenges that you faced as you were trying to develop solutions now to start handling data that was a higher level classification than the government websites or educational systems? How did your team overcome that?
Yeah, the next part of the journey was really difficult because now we are transitioning from, workloads and websites that were informational, no big deal. But all of a sudden, when you move to the next stage, whereby there's privacy involved, there's customer data involved, where there is a mission criticality involved, it took a very different dimension. And I think you know by then that during that time, probably about 6 years ago, most government don't go on the cloud. It was like taboo. I remember a minister dragging me aside and said the government shall never go on the cloud, right? Because it was like impossibility. Then we realized one thing quite interesting, right? First of all, we need to almost change the mindset of people that were regulating cloud. For example, security people. I sound a bit facetious, but I used to call them firewall huggers because if there's no firewall, there's no security, right? And cloud was a total paradigm shift for many people. For them, it's like if you don't see a firewall, if you don't see a parameter, it's not safe. So the first thing we did was that actually we sent a lot of people for training. I sent a lot of security guys for training to make them understand that there's a different way of doing security that could even be better. The concept of least privilege, the concept of zero trust, etc. So that was the first stage we did. The second thing that was even more important was policy. If you look at the policy manuals of most government, data classification was inherited basically mostly from national security and military, right? It's all about, well, if something happens to this data, it's going to affect the state. It's about matter of state. It's about state security. But if you take a very careful look, you realize that 80% of the stuff we do in the government has nothing to do with national security. That's reality.
And overclassification also leads to greater expense for organizations.
And I challenged people and said that, look, at the end, if you can give your data to Google, you can give your data to Facebook, why can't the government put something on the cloud? Because ultimately, Google and Facebook, etc., is on the cloud, right? And that's when we started thinking about, is there a better way to look at classification? Moving away from the original classification of restricted, confidential, secret, etc., to the concept of privacy classification, sensitive, non-sensitive, high sensitivity, etc. That policy kind of breakthrough was difficult. It took us nearly 3 years to convince people that there was a better way of looking at this. And when that happened, actually magic happened, right? When policy was in place, when things were done, then all of a sudden, there was a bigger appetite to move the next set of workloads into commercial cloud.
I remember this. This was like I think it was 2019, headed toward 2020.
Yeah, 18. Yeah, about 18 when we started this.
Yeah.
So that was very difficult. But in order to do that, we had to really get the whole government together, because if the whole government doesn't come together, it will not work, right? And when I say whole government, it really means the technology people, the policy people, the security people, also the legal people. It was quite surprising, right? And the reason why we got them all together is because we wanted everybody to understand and to let us understand what is their appetite for risk and what's their concerns. So we started building this thing called GCC, Government on Commercial Cloud, for the next batch of workloads. And government on the commercial cloud was actually not rocket science. There were a couple of requirements that were, at the end, non-negotiable. One was very simple. One was the fact that, you'd be surprised, this didn't come from security people. It came from the Attorney General's office, that data and workload has to be located in Singapore. And I understood why after they explained to me, right? The thing about sovereign control is that if everything is located in your country, even though it's operated by AWS, they are subjected to the laws of the country, which is very important. So they are subjected to our Official Secret Act, Computer Misuse Act, etc. It's very, very important. So if something goes wrong, there's recourse. If my data is scattered somewhere in Lithuania or something, there's no recourse. And that gave us one set of very important assurance. So that's the first thing. The second thing we did was also very important. Most of the government system still has to connect back to some on-prem environment. Now, in the old days, right, the connection back to on-prem environment was, well, not very secure. So we had to build a proper API gateway and secure the connection between those systems on the cloud and those systems on-prem, so that we are able to monitor and to be able to throttle any kind of problems as you go forward. And then there was a third requirement, to make sure that, you see, one of the challenges that all government face is that most of our stuff are run by vendors. We need to almost child-proof the migration to cloud. And as was explained to somebody this morning, one of the biggest security dangers of cloud is that if you get someone who doesn't know how to configure a cloud, it's a big problem, huge problem. All the security flaws will come into play. So the security guys mandated, and we had a minimal security baseline that was put in place that includes monitoring. And also more importantly is that we started developing infrastructure as code, IACs, templates, so that when we deploy in the cloud, it's actually properly configured as you go forward. So these were the kind of the bedrock of what we call government and commercial cloud. And with that, today we have migrated about 70% of our eligible workloads into commercial cloud and government commercial cloud. So 70% of our business is on the cloud, basically.
So Cheow Hoe, right now, there's probably a bunch of people going, 70% of your government workloads on the commercial cloud. That seems like a pretty good accomplishment. But I can tell you from working with Cheow Hoe and the GovTech team, that just wasn't enough for them. They continued to push for AWS solutions that would allow them to move progressively more sensitive, more regulated workloads to the cloud, and it was quite a pleasure. But I won't tell the story because you were there too. Can you tell everybody how you started sharing those requirements with AWS and the team, and how you actually started shaping what has now become a commercially available offering called Dedicated Local Zones?
Yeah, once we reached that point, there was really a decision to be made. How far more do we want to push this, right? And there was a time, probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, where there was a lot of discussion about what is a sovereign cloud. And every cloud service provider have a different concept, have a different philosophy, basically. But I believe there are really two rules that was quite important for cloud. One is the law of physics. If you lock everything up, throw away the keys, you cease to become a cloud, because you're basically shutting yourself out from everything. You're shutting yourself out from the internet. You're shutting yourself out from the ecosystem of a cloud. Then people argue and say, no, but that's not true. We will migrate those systems into your sovereign cloud that is ring-fenced and restricted. Well, then the second law comes in, the law of scale, unless you're very, very rich. Because migrating common systems, common services, onto the dedicated cloud and shutting everything off is very expensive. Even maintaining those services is very expensive. So the law of scale doesn't allow that. If you look at this chart, you realize that it drops off a cliff at some point. So we didn't want that approach to sovereign cloud. In many ways, we were trying to have our cake and eat it somehow. And that's where discussions came out and said, so what is the right approach towards a sovereign cloud? And I think this is where we started thinking about what are the kind of requirements needed for the next stage of evolution of a cloud. And this is when I was very lucky, in a sense. I met up with Max, I met up with many of the AWS engineers like Anthony, etc. And we started kind of like tossing ideas across. And we said that if you look at this chart, it's actually quite interesting, right?
CC is commercial cloud?
Commercial cloud.
So just run it in the Singapore region?
Yeah.
GCC?
No. CC is not even in the Singapore region.
Oh, it's anywhere. Run it in the world.
Right?
Okay.
Anywhere. Because as I told you, the lesser classified websites doesn't have to be in Singapore.
So you could optimize for lowest cost, for
lowest
instance.
cost. You can tap on anything that the commercial cloud gives you. It's highly
Services
scalable.
that are only available in one region and you want to use them, just go use them.
And highly scalable. You can scale it like whatever you want. Availability is going to be phenomenal because you can fail over to any region you want. But if you look at GCC, which I spoke about just now, the cost will be a little bit more because it has to be in the Singapore region. It can still scale quite easily. Availability and resiliency is there. But the trust level goes up because of the controls that we talk about. Then the third thing comes to place. What does dedicated local zones look like? And there were a couple of things, right? One, I think one of the most important discussion we had was that commercial cloud is opaque. We really don't know what goes on inside. I mean, that's the reality, right? You are working on a trust that AWS will be doing a good job, and they are going to be honest with us. What they promise is delivered. So there's some opaqueness in commercial cloud. So one of the key things was transparency. How do we increase transparency, right? And when you increase transparency, you are actually increasing trust levels. Transparency including that where the data is located, is it in a data center I can check? Does the personnel running it get cleared by us from security point of view, for example? So those things becomes quite important.
Well, yeah, for instance, in the GCC Plus, you have the option of having a higher personnel clearance for AWS team that operates the dedicated local zones, as opposed to those that are simply in the commercial regions. And
we actually physically caged the system. We wanted that, right? So we went through and think through what are the important things. The other thing is encryption, right? And Nitro does a good job doing that. We went through a lot with the Nitro team. How do we manage the keys, for example? There are private keys that we manage and not AWS, for example, right? And the problem with end-to-end encryption is that there are really 4 stages of encryption. Encryption at rest, encryption in transport, encryption in memory, and encryption in compute. The first 2 is easy. Encryption at rest, encryption in transport is very, very easy to do. The last 2 is very difficult to do because at some point you can decrypt the data to process in the memory as well as in processing. And that's where I think the ability to separate the zones into something like a black and red board, separate hardwares, are very important, and Nitro provides that. And the key is actually managed by us. So that, again, brought the trust level up to a next level. But there are sacrifices. Huh? It's going to be more expensive. From what we have right now is probably like about 2.5 times more expensive than commercial cloud.
Now you implemented beginning in July?
July.
Can you share any of the quick insights that you or other Singapore government users saw as they started to leverage the GCC Plus?
Yeah, one of the key things is that we wanted to start simple. Because one of the biggest challenge, again, it goes back to the laws skill that I talked about. When we implemented DLZs, the number of services going in is not a lot. But as time goes by, the number of services going in will improve. But we are okay for the moment because the first bunch of workloads, confidential workloads that we're migrating there, are lift and drops, right? These are legacy systems. You don't need to do a lot, basically. So we lift and drop. So those services are not as important. But as we start re-architecting more workloads, moving towards a modern cloud environment, those services become necessary.
Yeah, and even though they were lift and shift, they were still mission critical services. Yes. I remember you did a very, we did a very prescriptive acceptance test on it to make sure that one local zone could continue operating even if the other dedicated local zone had a service disruption, and your applications would continue operating seamlessly.
As I said, right, we really wanted our cake and eat it, right? The difference between even a dedicated local zone and on-prem is that you really have the cloud experience, right? Single control plane, very important. You got basically ability to scale. You still can scale.
Same way to build.
Same way to build. Pretty high resiliency, right? And I think the trust levels goes up significantly. Now, we think that over time, this could become a new normal as you go forward. And I will talk a little bit about that later on. But the importance of dedicated local zone cannot be underestimated because I think that the potential is there, basically.
Yeah, I love this chart again because it gives you an easy way to think about it. But let's sort of move into the where is GovTech and where is the Singapore Smart Nation going as a vision. So you've got a great foundation now. What are you looking forward to do to keep advancing the Smart Nation vision?
Yeah, you know, many people talk about AI, SaaS, and all these things, right? And I always ask them one question: are you even on the cloud? Because if you're not even on the cloud, forget about AI and SaaS and all that stuff, because it just ain't gonna happen. You're not gonna build your own foundational model on top of your on-prem premises. So you can't do that, right? So I think the cloud was really almost the first catalyst for us to move towards an innovative technology and a democratized technology environment. Now with commercial cloud, we moved towards GCC, we moved towards GCC plus, and as I said, today is 70% out there. It's going to probably hit 80, 85% in time to come. Now, the remaining 10, 15%, I told my team it's not worth fighting because that's painful.
Yeah.
Right? The moment you go to secret stuff, etc., matter of state, national security, and to me, there's not enough bang for the buck. Right.
Well, in fact, in some respects, by making such efficient use of the commercial cloud, the government on commercial cloud design,
Yep.
and then dedicated local zones, you're actually saving money so that some of those systems of national security actually get some more resources.
Hopefully.
Yes.
But there's always a concern there, Max. I mean, I'm going off course a little bit. I told the security guys that the biggest challenge you're going to have is that if you keep staying this way, your on-prem systems are going to be like marsupials, in Australia. You start growing pockets and having babies in them.
I
Because,
might have to use that one.
because ultimately, if you don't democratize technology, you will end up with the fact that you're not going to improve. And all your more confidential and secret systems just becomes legacy over time.
Well, I think you've demonstrated with the approach that you've taken is it's about incrementally understanding policy and compliance, involving all of the stakeholders, moving to some initial systems that people are comfortable with,
Correct.
then learning, and then continuing to evolve. So
And-
I think that's a great place to probably switch to this slide.
Just let me clarify one more thing. The slide before, right? Just one more thing. As people talk a lot about AI, we're reaching a very interesting juncture. Many of the things that we do in AI today, even Gen AI, is consumer AI, right? You'll learn very soon that whether it's Google, whether it's Microsoft Office or Google Work Suite, everything is going to be embedded in there. So it's going to be a great leveler. Every one of us will be using generative AI in a sense on a day-to-day basis. But to me, that's consumer AI. The thing that's going to make a difference is our ability to add our own high-value data and context to really change the shape of AI for the government going forward. Now, a structure like this, like the DLZ, allows us to do that. All of a sudden now, by leveraging a foundational model, a frozen foundational model, whereby it's only one way, and we can put our data on top of it, in the DLZ, for example, I think the impact is going to be tremendous.
I think it is, and because you've got a common architecture across all these three domains, you're actually going to be able to do data integration and really take advantage of the totality of all of the government data.
Exactly.
To be able to implement against probably generative AI models that are running in your own virtual private cloud, where your data is used to enhance the predictions in the model, but your data is not part of the model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that comes to this chart, which is very important, right? I think I started the cloud journey myself about 15 years ago, whereby there's only one flavor. It was vanilla, and that was it, right? But over time, you realize that depending on your needs, you have choices. And I listed the benefits here because many people, when they first started the cloud journey, talk about cost. But the reality is that cost is not the most important thing about cloud. There are many other things in here. Scalability, agility, your resiliency, your security, innovation, transparency, etc. Now, if you look at this chart, you realize that you have a choice. And you got to be quite measured about this in terms of what workload you put where. So for us, we got 3 platforms. for the unclassified and simple websites, etc., we put it on the commercial cloud. The leverage is on cost. Keep it as cheap as possible, make it as resilient as possible, and then just go ahead. For those in the middle, we put in GCC, whereby it affords level of security as well as data residency, etc. And for the more so-called secure, high-trusted, and mission-critical applications, we can put on GCC+. So now it gives us a choice, right? Unlike before. And I think that's very powerful as we move forward.
And I think I may have goofed up the slide changes because I think you wanted to say something, or maybe you already hit on the way that DLZs are a piece of your overall strategy.
You know, one of the things that when I came from the commercial sector, so I'm very conscious about commercial decisions. We can't convince AWS to make an investment in something like this if we're just going to like deal with a small sliver of the government. The reality is that DLZs will become very, very useful for regulated industries. Finance, healthcare, maritime, because many of them are looking for a solution that gives them better transparency and higher trust. So you look at this chart, you realize that because DLZ gives you increased transparency, better security, data isolation, but still afford a consistent cloud experience. We have now been talking to central banks, we've been talking to the Ministry of Healthcare, and they are very interested in this because they realize that this is one area that can become something that will allow them to go into the cloud journey without necessarily compromising many of the concerns in the past. So this is actually a very important next step, if you ask me.
Well, if we're talking about next steps, what is looking forward? What is Singapore's plan for next steps, or how are you going to continue to advance the Smart Nation strategy?
To me, Smart Nation has always been a journey. It's never a destination. A lot of people talk about, oh yes, when is it ever going to finish? You say, well, it never ever is going to finish. I spoke about AI quite a fair bit just now. With this kind of infrastructure that we've built, it really gave us a tremendous opportunity to explore new technologies. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, we could not even use SaaS, right? Like Salesforce, Workday, and many ServiceNow, etc. Today, we're using SaaS in the government, which is unthinkable in the past, right? It allows us to free our effort from trying to build every system ourselves because we can't, to something that allows us to innovate and try. AI is very important as we move forward because now this platform gives us the ability to tap on really the infinite resources of AWS in terms of GPUs, in terms of foundational models, Bedrock, etc., to really innovate and move us forward. So we're excited about this because we have now built the foundation for innovation, for trying new technology, and more importantly, link back to how we can use this to really improve the lives of our citizens as we go forward, which is really the Smart Nation objective in the first place.
Yep. If you look ahead, and if you consider your experience in Singapore, but also around the rest of the world, what do you think some of the key trends are that organizations should keep in mind as they manage to the evolving, you were great about highlighting this, the evolving regulatory and policy frameworks, the evolving security and compliance and cybersecurity concerns, and new technologies that are not just the old lift and shift or the old rebuild and refactor, but now fundamentally new approaches like with generative AI.
Right.
This is your opportunity to kind of share with this crowd the observations that you've got now 8 years into the journey.
Yeah, one thing about technology is that it's just going to, like DLZ, for example, today it's like 2.5 times or something more expensive than a pure commercial cloud. But with scale, the cost will come down significantly. And when the cost comes down and the services enriches in DLZ, then you ask yourself the question, I don't even need to use like commercial cloud, I can use something better at a fraction of the cost. enough service for me to actually build a better application. So what's going to happen is that the security and trust benchmark will have to go up. And this is something that I think all of us realize its importance, because more and more so, we are working in an environment that is quite toxic, actually, in the sense that the amount of spams, the amount of phishing incidents, etc. Everybody will be asking for a higher security benchmark. And I think if this works well, ultimately what it does is that they're willing to raise the bar and say that even some of them today that are some commercial cloud can move over DLZ, for example, to raise that bar. It also raises something more important. For the longest time, many organizations, including the government, were not able to use really like SaaS and was unable to tap on the global ecosystem, mainly because of the fears, right? That if I go to the global ecosystem, they can only resell in commercial cloud, and nothing's going to work, right? We managed, together with AWS, actually convince Salesforce to build Hyperforce, which is to build something whereby Salesforce can actually work on data and workload that is on the commercial cloud. So now Salesforce is coming to us and say, can we build something on the dedicated local zones? We said, definitely, but give us time, right? Workday has same thing, right? In the past, everything was hosted out of the US or Ireland, for example. Today, they're hosted on AWS in Singapore, for example. So the opportunity opens up significantly. I spoke about AI a little bit, but I think we're just scratching the surface right now. The key to AI is really about very specific context and high-quality data. And with a better infrastructure like what we have today, those models become a reality. In the past, I keep asking the agencies, why don't you build an AI model for this? They say, no, I can't, because he has to go to the cloud. I say, oh, okay, right? But with dedicated local zones, GCC+, etc., it allows us to then start building these specific models that are very high value, that will leverage on a wider ecosystem, and that's where innovation happens. So I think the future is very interesting, because as we solve many of these problems, it truly allows us to democratize technology, and I'm a firm believer in that philosophy as you go forward.
Well, we've certainly enjoyed working with GovTech and Cheow Hoe with you directly, because as I said, you've continued to push us, and it's clear why. Your passion for modernizing the government and for delivering better citizen services is a perfect counterbalance for us. You've continued to push the AWS team in Singapore in particular in so many different ways that you're looking both at what you're trying to accomplish today, but also where you're trying to drive strategy in the future. The observations about how you get stakeholders on board, I think the very deep dives that we did with you and your team and with security practitioners in the Singapore government to bring everybody along on this journey were critical. And I believe that AWS's use of third-party attestation and third-party accreditations on key components also helps give you the artifacts, the tangible things that you need to continue to demonstrate how you're building better trusted systems, more transparent systems, including auditability and monitoring functions into those systems. So thanks very much for that today, Cheow Hoe. That was a super run through the journey and particularly how you helped build this dedicated local zone offering. I'm going to go ahead and sort of quickly wrap up here. And then we'll be around if you want to come on up and ask any questions. The AWS cloud, as we've talked about it, now positions AWS to do what we've always done, which is give customers more choice. And by innovating with things like the dedicated local zone, you can seamlessly move from AWS global regions, to on-premise customer infrastructure solutions and out to the edge. Wherever your applications need to run, you can now take care of both the physical and technical configuration and requirements that you've got with the same infrastructure, same services, same APIs, using the same tools, in many cases with the same SaaS providers that you use across all your environments. And we think it's this kind of end-to-end approach to digital sovereignty that is going to give customers the choice of this continuum so they don't have to go off and build bespoke solutions. This chart right here is a quick summary of the services that are available in AWS Dedicated Local Zones today. Stay tuned, just as we always do. We can continue innovating and iterating in here. And so you can expect to see the number of services and the features and offerings grow as we continue driving this forward. You all today, if you're interested, I saw two good friends earlier from work I had done in the UK, and they said, how can we get started? You know, what's the opportunity in the UK? You can start right now is the answer. And we start with a conversation to help do many of the things that we did with Cheow Hoe, where we sit down with you and we take a look at how you're defining your digital sovereignty requirements, what kind of scalability you have, what kind of elasticity you need, what kind of tenancy features or failover features do you need. And AWS, working with your local account teams, can sit down and help you start designing how would you configure and use a dedicated local zone and how would you define the security perimeters, and how would you define the operational requirements that you've got so that you can use this common capability across the AWS region, across local zones, and out to the edge. And so finally, as we've discussed today, there is a fair amount of complexity. You made it sound simple in a certain respect. I think you skipped over some of the really tough meetings. But there's a fair amount of complexity. Our job at AWS is to help customers and partners navigate the emerging digital sovereignty landscape by working with your AWS team, by leveraging some of the specialists on my team. We can help you make the right choices along this continuum. We're committed to continuing to work, as our digital sovereignty pledge says, to develop the most capable sovereign by design features in the commercial cloud, then continue evolving on-premise infrastructure solutions, and then continue working with devices at the edge, all to bring you the greatest range of sovereignty controls, of privacy safeguards, and of security features that are available from any cloud service provider. And I'm just looking forward to where you and where all the other people in this room are going in terms of innovation, because that's what's going to drive AWS's delivery of continuing digital sovereignty solutions. And so here's what I'd like you to have as a takeaway as we wrap up. If any of these things strike a chord with you, either today or as those 82% of people around the world who are thinking about digital sovereignty and what it means for them over the next couple of years, connect with your AWS team. Go ahead and start these solutions. We'll see where they go. Continue to learn more about how to manage the complexity of digital sovereignty and leverage the cloud where you can today. There's 2 more sessions that are going on at reInvent. You can see them right there on November 30th. And finally, if you scan the QR code up here, that'll connect you with additional resources, including reports, white papers, and other things that'll provide guidance and other insights to keep you up with the evolving regulatory landscape and help you advance your journey on the cloud. It's been a pleasure talking with everybody here today. Cheow Hoe, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Please give Cheow Hoe a round of applause.